Hello, it's Ian at Fighting 15s, and today I'm just going to show you basically how I ink figures ready for photography. I've spent some time basing and cleaning up figures. They're put onto little round bases, so use whatever's convenient, just so I've got something to hold and so that I've got something identifiable when I photograph them later to cut out, so the black will disappear when I photograph and edit the picture. So to just illustrate how slow this is, I have something like 55 figures to ink here, and it only makes up 16 codes in the shop. So to actually get 15 codes properly photographed and to a commercial standard takes time, and when you've got more than 800 codes to go through, you can guess that if I can do this many in about 3 days with all the gluing and assembly and drying time required plus the photography session, you can see that with 800 I've got a fair way to go. But anyway, what we've got here is it's a railway black enamel. I've just found Humbrol enamel isn't very good anymore, so I've been experimenting, and I basically take good brush load into a lid and just replace the cap. This rail match is a really good matte black when it's on. I will be using that for priming figures. It doesn't really prime them, it's more undercoating. And then I've got some standard cellulose thinners, which I basically take about a cap load and stick in the lid with the paint. And you may notice this is a really dreadful brush because it doesn't need to be up to very much apart from just daubing on thinners, and we give this a really good mix so that it's like a little suspension of paint in the thinners. The cellulose thinners dries quite quickly. If you see, it was just about taint that with a lightish grey. And so basically you're just going to take a figure and that's actually probably needs a bit more paint in it, looking at that. So we'll stop there, that's too light, and wipe the brush off, get the matte black paint back again. Ideally I'd make up a big batch of this and have it constantly available, but I can't find a suitable container at the moment, so I'm mixing it up every time at the moment, and it might work a bit better. Let's see how we go. We can always add a bit more paint. Similarly, you can always add a bit more thinners if it all goes pear-shaped. So let's try a different figure, and that's better. That's about right. So what the stain or the ink does is sink into all the crevices, but more importantly, in a way, it also mattes down the figure as a whole. So a very fine amount stays on all the raised surfaces. See, it won't look like this when it's dry, but a very fine amount stays on the raised surfaces and some sinks into the crevices. Why I'm using basically cellulose option rather than say a water-based ink is the surface tension properties of the cellulose based option is far better. There's virtually no surface tension and it just flows beautifully into the crevices. Let's see, and so you can see what the figure is like. Photographing a plain metal figure is possible, but you need really diffuse lighting, and it really doesn't show the detail. So you know, thin black paint, I keep calling it ink, but it is technically just thinned black paint, is just helping to define the figure for photography. Right, I'm just going to quietly work my way through these. It's just not particularly precise. The only precision in this is making sure I stick the figures back on the right coded bag, so that when I photograph them later, they're all identified. I could number all the bases, but basically I'll be keeping these for reference later, and so I may well prime the figures or undercoat them with black paint and paint them for display later. But the inking is just a very quick way of showing off figures for photography for a shop, and a cheap way. Basically, if you want really good 15mm figures painted for display for a shop, you need to pay somewhere around £10 a figure. It's no cheaper than a 28mm figure done to a very high standard, simply because there's as much work involved in painting a 15mm figure to a high standard. Well, there we are. That's it. I'll just carry on with that. Right, there we are. All done. It's a bit messy, but that will clean up. Just clean off the brush in some white spirit and save it for next time. Wipe it down. Do not lick your brushes after using cellulose thinners or anything. It's not very pleasant. If you've got used to acrylic paints, you probably do. You lick your brushes to repoint them. Not on this. So I don't know if we go back to one of the first figures, and it seems to show how he's doing. Still got to dry perfectly, but he's beginning to see that how that looks once it's inked. So the tone tends to even out slightly more as it dries, but nonetheless there's a certain amount of ink in the crevices which will be picked out by the camera, and importantly you can see hopefully I hope you can see that the flat surfaces or rounded surfaces of the figures are matted down, and this will stop the light from the light tint shining off different parts and not showing the figure to its best. So there we are. So quite a selection of stuff here. Here's the Hittites from Gladiator Biblical's range, and mainly some of the Renaissance figures. The reason for this, although I have just stated I'm prioritising these chaps, which is the Martian Empire's range, is simply because I had 2 orders to cast, and when I cast up the figures I put a set of everything aside, so I knew there was a set of figures to work from, and basically cleaned them up and assembled them so that when I take photographs I should be able to show most of the variants. Some of them, I mean, let's see, there is one of the Hittites. It's got a shield like that, and then the other version of the Hittites have a rectangular shield, but the shields are randomly supplied with the figures, so you can get another variant in effect by putting a different shield on. I'm just not showing that. I'm just showing the basic poses that are available for each code, and then you get something like the chariots. So this is one part of a Hittite chariot cruise. There are basically 6 figures and 3 chariots, and permutations and combinations of all of those to make up 18 codes, I think, in the end. So when I said earlier that, you know, there's 16 codes worth of figures there, I sort of lump the chariots in as one code, because all of them are driver A with spearman A, and driver A with spearman B, and so on, and shield bearer. So they're all the same sort of set of figures, just mixed around with a box chariot, a large D-plan chariot, and a small D-plan chariot. So the 3 different chariots give the basis of the range, and then there's a general's chariot as well, which is only different because it has a, say, a 6-spoke wheel as opposed to all the rest, which are 4-spoke wheels. But we have to put together the general's chariot just to show that it exists. I could show them all in bits, but frankly, if I'm going to paint them later, I want them assembled, and sticking chariot wheels on isn't much fun with super glue because you end up with chariot wheels stuck to your fingertips. The general guide is basically on a chariot. The little chariot wheel sits on the, just with that, it's just a pile of loose chariots. So the chariot wheel just sits on there, there's a little recess, and the best thing to do is to work into the chariot wheel a file like that, and then to get a tight fit on the end, so when you super glue it, you can basically almost squeeze it on, and it will stay there while the glue works its business, because super glue does not set that quickly. Anyway, that's it. So you can see I work in chaos. So there's a paint hitting the floor. So there we are, that's what we've been working on for the video, and hopefully over the next day or two I will actually begin to photograph these figures and you'll see them on the new shop. Bye.